Okay, next up is magic in general as opposed to healing magic. And when I'm talking about resource management in those situations, the two most common areas where that would apply would be, of course, spell slots, where your wizard or your elf or whoever is your spellcaster only has so many spells of each level per day. And then also uh, charged items, and that includes things like wands, scrolls, potions, anything where you can't simply just use it over and over and over again forever, which truthfully is most items. The big complaint you get sometimes about Dungeons and Dragons and those types of games, especially then some of the older games, is the number of spells per day, especially at low levels. In the older versions of the game and in the older versions retro clones, the first level characters usually only have one spell. And the idea that you hear is where people complain that, oh, well, my magic user has cast his one sleep spell or whatever he has, and he's done for the day. That's it. That's what he had, and now it's got to rest, and until tomorrow he's useless. Well, I find that silly, frankly. There's lots you can be doing. You may not be so directly involved in the combats, but again, if you go back to that exploration model and you go back to the idea that resource management is integral to the game. I'm paraphrasing James over in Grognardia, where he had mentioned that in one of his posts a while back, and I heartily agree. The magic user can be doing plenty of things. Chances are he has a high intelligence. Maybe there's puzzles he can be helping to solve. Maybe he speaks extra languages if you actually meet a monster willing to talk, or find ancient writings on the wall to read. He could be doing the mapping. He's probably got a pen and paper. Maybe he can just simply hold the torch because the fighters and stuff are trying to juggle shields and broadswords and what have you, and he's probably hanging back anyway. So I don't think that you're dealing with a situation where once you've cast your spell or spells that you're out of the game. There's nothing to stop you from trying to do something clever that in a fight that doesn't necessarily involve you wading in as though you were wearing plate mail or not able to sling spells left and right. In some versions of the game, I think in the Holmes Basic Dungeons and Dragons, there's actually rules for magic users creating scrolls of their own. It costs money, but you can do it, and then that gives you a little extra power. So I think in that case, there's a lot of things you can do if you think just beyond, oh, my job is to sling spells into the middle of a combat. When the same basic logic holds true when you're dealing with things like scrolls or potions or charged items like wands and things like that, or even something that doesn't have a limited number of charges but perhaps a limited number of uses per day. Same idea. Yes, you have to think carefully about when you use it and why you use it, but the fact is, if you have such items, that's a bonus. You're good for you. You've got an extra resource at your disposal. Don't squander it. Again, I don't think players should feel entitled to things like that. I think it's something where if they're paying attention to all the different ways they can approach the game, they'll be able to possibly find ways to get around, using up that magic and saving it for when they really need it. Okay, time and money. Starting with time. In the dungeon, time's broken up into increments called turns, which are about 10 minutes. I'm referring to games like Basic D&D and retro clones like Labyrinth Lord for that, but it's pretty common in various editions of Dungeons and Dragons and the retro clones. If you look at some of the rules about movement through the dungeon, it seems at first, and you hear this from a lot of players, that it's a very short distance to cover in such a long time. But if you look at it and you think about it, you're supposed to be doing things like mapping, keeping marching order, and even though I agree, 10 minutes seems like a long time, it's a conceit for the simplified game mechanic, and it's not so unrealistic if you take into account the level of care that somebody moving through a dungeon, pushing the floor with a 10-foot pole and all this stuff might be exhibiting. And again, it goes back to that exploration aspect. Other aspects of time, like the combat round and wilderness travel, where it's measured by the day, I'm not really going to get into because that's a little bit broad to worry about right now. Money. At low levels, money's really important. Quite often, you may not even have enough to buy all the basic equipment you wanted. I've seen games where one player is asking if his character can borrow a few gold off another character so he can get a shield or something like that. But I think if you go back to that exploration model, that makes a lot of sense because it's expensive to mount these kinds of expeditions. It's not just fighting the monsters. Most people can't afford to do this kind of thing. Imagine a game where the party actually had to go to somebody like a merchant to get them to bankroll an expedition and had to give the merchant a cut. I think that'd be kind of cool, actually. I'm going to remember that one, actually. Anyway, make a note to self. Anyway, at higher levels, obviously, the characters aren't worrying so much about every copper piece, but then I think money should still matter because obviously they're not worried about buying a horse or buying rations or things like that because they have enough money for that, but they should be using their money for something. Depending on the setting in the game, the campaign, maybe there's training costs, maybe there's taxes, maybe they're setting aside money for a stronghold or doing magical research or what have you. Maybe they're paying their hirelings or raising a mercenary army. There could be all sorts of things. Maybe they're building a pirate ship. But I think that even when characters have made a lot of gold and by the comparison with most of the population they're filthy rich compared to some peasant or something, I do think it's best when that resource is still something they need to keep track of and keeps them a little hungry. Even if they're not literally poor, there's some reason that they may need to find some more cash, or they would be interested in seeking treasures, even if it's because they don't want it for the money, but maybe it's a powerful magic item or something. So when you have a game where all these things sort of blend together and make a world where you have to pay attention to what you have and what you don't have and what you need, it becomes a lot more than just going from room to room and fighting monsters. And I think it becomes much more engaging. There's a lot more depth. And I think, frankly, it makes it a lot more fun. I don't think resource management is tedious. I think it actually adds a lot to the game if you approach the game in the right way. And obviously, you've got to do what's fun for you. But that's my take on it. See you next time.